Yay, welcome everybody. Let's see. Oh, great, lovely to see you all. Okay, I think maybe that's everyone in. Yeah, hi. I'll do a little intro first, Sahjan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Gavin Wade. Pronouns he, him. We're here at Eastside Projects, or we're here in Sahjan's celestial world. We'll find out where in a minute. And we're going to spend some time, I'm going to spend some time finding out some things about this project we have in progress with Sahjan, who we have invited to be one of the incidental artists here at Eastside Projects. We'll find out more about that, and I'm sure we can get some of your questions into the mix also along the way. Just to give you a little note that we are recording, and that will be shared later on stream on the Eastside Projects website. And there's also closed captioning. If you should be able to see how to click on that. Hopefully that's evident. It shows up on the bottom row. Otherwise, we are going to go with the flow and see where we lead. I don't know where we're going to find out. I'm intrigued. So over to you, Sahjan.
Oh, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And it's wonderful to see everyone in this virtual space. I had a preset plan of how I was going to do this, but then I thought actually it'd be quite interesting for me and Gavin to talk through some of this world that's being made. The first thing I want to do, which I usually do with Gavin and most people I work with, is I play music to start this kind of session off with, so just to keep everyone kind of easy and breezy. But yeah, so I'll play a track and then we can once the track stops, it's about 3 minutes long. Then me and Gavin will start talking, and feel free to put questions in the chat or just direct them at us. I'm happy for either or, but cool, I'll start playing. And you won't see anything, fine, just a screen.
We were young and out of control. I hadn't seen you since I was about 16 years old. But then you called me up the other day. I was shocked, oh, what could I say? And your voice exactly the same. And it makes me feel, oh, just like we never said goodbye. When you spoke to me that way, oh, just like we never said goodbye. And it makes me feel. We went out the very next day. You still remember my favorite place. And we laughed just like we used to, and did everything we like to do. And now we're holding hands and running. And it makes me feel, oh, just like we never said goodbye. When you looked at me that way, oh, just like we never said goodbye. And it makes me feel, oh, just like we never said goodbye. When you held my hand that way, oh, just like we never said goodbye. And it makes me feel. We were young, we had everything we wanted, running wild through the night. We were young, we had everything we needed, and so that now to be with me, I got everything I could ever need. And it makes me feel, and it makes me feel, and it makes me feel, oh, just like we never said goodbye. When you held my hand that way, oh, just like we never said goodbye. And it makes me feel, still got that glint in your eye, like you did the very first time. Oh, it's like we never
Cool. I'm stopping sharing now. And Gavin, it's me and you.
What an intro.
I really wanted to talk about the fact that I use sound and sonic reverberations quite a lot in the way I think and work. And I think it's a really beautiful astral way to start a conversation in a space together as a group. Because a lot of the times these sort of environments, they kind of prevent us from feeling the reverberations from each other. And like the song's incredible. So Sophie died. I get very emotional when I talk about her because she died a few years ago. She was taking a photo of the moon on her roof in Athens and she fell off.
No.
And it was she was an extraordinary music producer and a musician. And she's had a big influence on queer and trans kind of hyperpop producers and musicians and artists and visual artists. And she had a big impact on me. So I just thought it was a really great way to open this up. And I feel like I've never said goodbye. So it's a great way.
Yeah. No, it's great because I know you mentioned Sophie and the relationship to Sophie Chapman as well, another collaborator on the project, and you kind of talk, and I didn't know the music, so actually it's really great to hear. High energy. That bit that we did everything we wanted, we did everything we needed. I like those lines.
Yeah. She kind of was interesting because she created like a fugitive or process of fugitivity for herself to survive, because she never really revealed an image of herself. So and I'm really interested in that as a model, because she would there's a lot of times early in her career where she was sort of accused of femploitation, like so using a female voice even though she was trans. So there's quite interesting paradigms in kind of how like just visually how interesting she was, but also politically, like socially and politically behind the scenes what she was doing. And then she did reveal an image of herself a few years ago for the first music video she made, and it's just been very interesting how she's kind of an opaque figure, and I really admire that in an age of hyper visibility. Yeah. So maybe Gavin, we could talk a bit about like the genesis of the project, you know?
Yeah, because it actually made me think of when you gave me a little card and it had a little computer generated version of your head on it, and it had that sense of it being a persona of like a new emergence of an artist, because we'd known each other for a while, and then suddenly it was like seeing the growth and new you growing out of all the ideas that were already you, but all of a sudden I think that's what it felt exciting early on to want to see that more. And I think in a way that's a great thing for me, to want to work with an artist. And I think, you know, I know that Ruth thinks that as well. It's like you want to be part of growth and change and transformation and see something coming into being. And I think it still feels like we're in that process, which is really exciting one to be in.
Yeah, I think people who know me and spend time with me kind of realize that there's that I treat like ideas as materials and materials as ideas, because I'm quite interested in how material activates and is used, because how do I say this? I'm trying to figure out a vocabulary for like the way I think. But I think that one of the things that I'm very interested in is how ideas interact with material ecosystems. And again, the other way around, how material ecosystem operates with an idea. And it's a very cerebral way of explaining that basically, I think the infrastructures of the way we exist in kind of dictate what sort of imaginations we have and the kind of freedoms we can enact. So throughout the way that this project, which is called Dank Ecology 1, ALIENVillage, is the first, I think, in a series of ecologies I'm working on. Ecologies is basically a portmanteau, which I kind of partially came up with, but also realized is a form of a company, which is a data mining company. Ecology is a portmanteau, which is a combine word, if that's a great way of describing it. And the two words are economy and ecology. And yeah, when Gavin and Ruth kind of spoke to me early on and invited me into this world of incidental artists, the thing I was really thinking about was kind of like where the body could potentially go and where it could potentially be, and how it can be something in multiple different lenses. And then I was thinking quite a lot about my like family's village in India, and not through like an identitarian representational lens, but more as a structural social lens, like what actually happens to a site. as it evolves and gets impacted by different people's aspirations, dreams, failings, possibilities. And the village was just a really great site to do that.
That was when we did a one-to-one, didn't we? And you were showing me all these references that were bubbling and, you know, capturing your attention, and that range from almost the everyday, but everyday at a distance of this idea of the village in India and the realities of that, but also then on the counterpoint of all these science fiction ways in that really do cover from the genesis of the universe to humanity coming, you know, a long time afterwards, and heading into the future and what we might become in the future. So I think even that is that idea of doing a studio visit, understanding what someone is thinking about, and you didn't know how all that was going to come together at that point.
No, yeah, I like when things get like a sense of like gravities come into thinking. Like when we first spoke about, this was before you invited me in, like the studio visit, I was just like, oh, what actually happens to things as they move across time and space? And that was kind of the thinking I was having, was sitting at the back of my head, because I inherit, like, my family have like a huge like archive of images and objects from India. And they were like, my mom brought that with her from India to the UK when she migrated. And then like I was thinking a lot about like what these things would be like in the future. Materially, what was interesting about some of the images were they're actually impacted by a type of fungus. So fungus actually impacted the kind of like started, yeah, like destroying a lot of the imagery, because something was some type of mold or some type of moisture level kind of got brought into one of the photo albums, and it just was like maybe like 30 to 60 photos were just like decimated, but then like these 10 or 15 which would just have these like incredible remnants of the interaction with the fungus. So I was thinking quite a lot about that. Was basically the thinking when we first had that studio conversation, was like, oh, it's weird how like this thing came, and it came with baggage, basically, like it came with a contaminant. And it's something I'm really interested in thinking about, is the fact that like that we carry more than ourselves with us. Like we're fundamentally made by impacts with otherness all the time. Like I am made out of an other more than I am myself. And I really like that type of thinking, because it's maybe because maybe it's got a lot to do with this kind of reactionary position I'm taking, which I think is actually quite it's kind of just an intellectual, interesting position to be in, which is like, I'm kind of tired of just being an individual. And I think it's an exhausting framework to be in, because we've kind of reached a stage where it's very visible what the individual the individualism within Western liberalism is doing to the subject, is actually it's enacting us to constantly be laboring and using our bodies in like sort of strange ways, which are destroying like long-term human habitability of a planet. And I'm thinking quite a lot about those things, which are also forms of contamination. But that was I also just want to apologize to everyone, because I take these long tangents of thought to get somewhere, but I kind of am beginning to embrace them more. But that's how me and Gavin, when we first came together, like in our studio visit, when we're thinking together in a room, in a chamber, was that conversation about like what would happen to the images if they keep on getting decimated, you know, or if they started becoming just data, which is what's actually strangely happening right now, is that a lot of them are just ending up in like as data systems within archives. Yeah,
you're seeing that as a positive, aren't you? You're seeing suddenly something that may be traumatic in a way to decimate or alter, you know, well, you didn't intend for that to happen, but then all of a sudden you see that as an organic process, like something that shouldn't be discarded but should be utilized. That becomes the idea. That material change becomes an idea for an exhibition or how to make art.
Yeah, instead of like, it reminds me of all the archives which have been destroyed, and the sort of relationship that an institutional practice has towards destruction is very different to the people who have to hold on to the destruction, if that makes sense. Like the sort of like Kenyan archives, for example, which were basically dumped in the ocean by the British, the archives in India, which were sort of, again, either rewritten or sort of hidden and then also like when you're trying to go back into time, like in a very literal sense in a time machine, when you're trying to find things, it's kind of interesting as a sort of the work that's having to be done by predominantly like people of that region to actually find things out is interesting. So the position I've always taken with that is like we should be opening up these arenas to contemplate and to also use them as sites for possibility, because it's a spectral site. Like things have happened to these are actual bodily realities for people, like that happened in historical terms. And when I'm in the studio, one of the great things about thinking like that is like you're never alone, because you realize that other people are with you, even if they're like thousands of years in the past, or like 500 years in the past, and potentially 500 years in the future. They're like always with you, and they're kind of a chorus to your existence. And you're also part of that, you know, like if you think about it in a very genealogical sense, like I don't want to turn it on to me, but I'm just using me as an example, but like my existence has been made out of people's decisions before me. There might have been like small decisions, but and then also like those social inheritances that have made me have come from other people. And then there'll also be in other forms of impacts, like with friendships, those things will be passed on to other people. So I'm always contaminating other things. That's what I was thinking about the archive, is like, it's actually something which is, or archival behavior is actually something which is quite similar. It's like, it's made out of otherness. It's always made out of something. And usually in positions of, yeah, that's kind of a good way of framing it for me. Yeah.
And then is your process to think of what other voices can work with you to rematerialize something? Is that how you might think then? Or
yeah, it's kind of like a rave. That's a good way of describing it. Like I come from like a rave, like in club. Like I really like raving and going to clubs. I used to love it. I hope to go back to Berlin for a while and do that. But I really like the environment where there's like I don't ever, there's something interesting happens when you bring like 2,000-3,000 people in a room together and they're just dancing, that you feel like that's kind of a really beautiful moment to see people. And I was thinking a lot about that in terms of like the bringing together of people, and not sort of, because to frame this for everyone who's here, the project is very like tentacular. There's like so many different components of people's involved. There's like me working with my mom, there's me working with like members, individuals of like diaspora from Punjab. There's working with Sophie Chapman on a video in a chatbot called Honey, and an advertising platform for Honey. And then there's me working with Zhang on a new work essentially, which is based on cryogenics and survival. And then there's the work which is being made with mycelial experts in Birmingham, Matt Gale, and sound environment design. And there's probably a lot more which I'm always forgetting about this project. But there's these people I'm bringing, and oh yes, of course, one of the most important parts is working with the kids from Manor Park School, which has been just so much fun, because we've kind of brought them into for them to think about their future structurally, like what they want to do in the future and what they see the future as. And it's been really extraordinary just hearing how much their ambitions and dreams have been shaped by the sort of technologies and interfaces of technology they're within. And they're just really great kids, and they're going to be making a science fiction film by themselves with like support from us, and we'll be filming themselves. And it's really
I haven't had the pleasure yet to be there in those workshops. It's been Ruth and Dinosaur and Jazz have been there with you. So tell me what happens in those situations. How do you make the connection with the kids in the school there?
Yeah, when I watched the Florida project like a few years ago, and it was like with it was just, I really I keep on forgetting his name, the director. He also made Tangerine, which is I would recommend to every human being to watch, or even non-human being personally. Just have it screening in front of like funguses and trees. But the Tangerine is extraordinary. It's also on an iPhone, and the Florida project was shot and it's motels in Florida, which is it's kind of, if anybody's ever read like a Carceral Capitalism by Jackie Wang and other texts which kind of address like Florida carceral politics and social politics, it's a really great space to it's just a really interesting site, because it's like a complete breakdown of social welfare support for a whole state. There's kids who are basically living in motels, which is something I unfortunately had to see when I was in the US for a while. But the film's extraordinary, and I was thinking a lot about other films where kids are involved, like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where all they're just like and the kids are basically the people experiencing things, the spectral things. And same in Akira, Gavin, with the kids who are experiencing like the tension sites of the like the astral, the ESP, like something out there, you know. And I wanted to work with kids because I think it was really like fun, and you get to learn a lot from them. And I think that it's also interesting what you take away, because you realize they just they have such rich worlds they want to sort of talk about. And you could just like, we gave them like a few prompts, like we asked them a few questions about what they want to do, what they see the future as, the things that they're feeling towards the future. We're on workshop 3 next week, which is camera work, where we'll be showing them how to work with cameras and how to film themselves. They've made the costumes, which I think Ruth uploaded to Instagram to show you guys, but they were just so fun. I just think there's something extraordinary about hearing. It's like a chorus thing. Again, Gavin, it's like that chorus thing. It's like hearing a different perspective, or dissolving yourself into someone else's world for a moment, to just inhabit and think through with somebody else how something is being, how they're kind of how someone else is living and thinking and being in time and space.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, even that approach is affecting ways that a number of quite big institutions around the world, something like a documenter that has a group leading it, and the fallout from that, or the opportunities to open up an authorship through curating, in a way. I suppose that's part of it. When we were first chatting with you about this exhibition, we were asking a question: would you be interested in it as partly an artist curator role that picks up on previous shows, where we've worked with Sonia Boyce and Harold Offe and Rahana Zaman, and but this is another approach, a different combining of yourself as the artist curator with other people.
I think it's like we're making a primordial goo of existence together, like that's what it kind of feels like. I feel like I wanted to sort of create something which kind of had, like, because the first material I always work with, I should say this, I always start with the back and then work my way to the front, but like the first material is like life, because I'm really interested in like when something activates life and when life is activated. So I thought it'd be really great for people to think about like living, because this, with conversations having with Gary Zhang, were predominantly like, oh, like when does something, like because we're focusing so much on cryogenics, for example, we're like, when does life start and when do we temporarily suspend life, and when does it, like, these quite complex questions about livingness. And then with Sophie, it's the exact same conversation as having, this is Sophie Chapman, the artist I'm working with, and Honey. It was the exact same conversation about like Honey, who's kind of this gender queer material substance, which kind of infiltrates subjects to change them. And it was again like how, and then she, like we use like she, her to talk about her sometimes, but sometimes she's quite interchangeable. But we were thinking quite a lot about like with Honey, like the chatbot being an after effect, because there's going to be a digital e-commerce chatbot which exists across 4 different websites, which will talk to audiences about Honey will be addressing them directly and taking them through like a journey, which looks a bit like a customer service experience, but actually really reveals quite a lot about Honey's production as a subject and a being. So yeah, it was one of the thinkings that was going on quite a lot when we were this idea of like, how do you shape something as a maker, as an artist? Is that I wanted to think about the idea of like really the edges of me, like really just like getting rid of them a bit, just see, and that can be a site of difficulty, but it's also a site of interest for me. But yeah,
you've also used it, I guess, to sort of demonstrate the possibilities of working with organizations and institutions and partners. Like, we become part of your context, and you, like, in the way that you become part of our context, it's like sharing of it. So you suggesting an idea like a chatbot, which then isn't only existing in the gallery as part of an exhibition that's contained, it's like it takes over part of our website to Off to Consile Against website or Up Projects website, all the people involved and in making something happen. I don't know how conscious that was to make something that were you asking yourself a question, how can you infect us and others? Was that one of the answers to that question? Or?
Yes, I was slightly conscious of it because I believe in, like, I was thinking quite a lot about reciprocal work, And another thing I have like I always talk about this because I think it's actually becoming more and more part of the paradigm operating, but I kind of have a negative affirmation about making. So I don't really see it as like I understand like the sort of like James Baldwin idea that we're sharing, of course, like sharing trauma and stories is really like important, and it's an important arc of history, and we need to do that. But I'm also a bit like, it's a financial institution at the end of the day, and like you're working as like, you know, I know where I'm very conscious of what I'm embedding myself into, regardless of what level, or yeah, essentially finance circulates the art world. So I'm very conscious of those things. But the thing I was thinking, and I remember having a studio visit with a curator, and they're asking me how I see myself working with an institution. I was like, I use the word infection and infectedness because I think that you actually change the conditions of the hosts, yeah, through like some type of like transformation, you know, like that. Because when I've been increasingly unwell, like physically, and like over the last few years. So it's been kind of an interesting like thing to think through, like the idea of when my body stops working for me, or like when my mental capacity, like my mental illness prevents me from doing certain things. I start thinking quite a lot about like the capacity, what something else is doing to me essentially, and how that I work with it in a reciprocal way. And that's why I kind of have it, I kind of celebrate that negative affirmation a bit more, because it feels like it's the antithesis of kind of a lot of art making right now, which is yeah. But I think it's interesting. I think it's like an intriguing model.
Yeah, it's kind of to wield that, to use that in how you express an idea or a proposition. And it made me just think about some of the characters in Akira, so that the children who have found themselves with these incredible psychic telekinetic powers, the children who've had it for a long time, they look, when you get up close, they look like old people, and they can't, or one of them can't walk anymore and has to float around in a chair. And it is this, yeah, you sort of see that as an idea, imagining Katsuhiro Otomo creating that graphic novel, creating the comic, and trying, yeah, maybe I see that as sort of imagining the weight and the impact of the legacies of what had happened in Japan 50 years before he started making that graphic novel in the early 1980s. Like how, yeah, a figure, those children carry the weight of the problems that the society has to live with after a wartime experience that is traumatized the whole nation in a way. So it's yeah, I feel that in each of those elements, it's like it can be super poppy and have a rave out like skin and outlook, but it still contains ideas of wearing out. And yeah, it's how, I suppose, how you get that to feel, how do you put that into all the different layers of the artworks?
Yeah, I think it's like yeah, I really appreciate how you spoke about that, because I really think it's true. It's like there's like that there is something that like in terms of the lineage of an event or a moment in time, and increasingly it's very visible in this moment, the fact that we're leaving an inherited world to another, like it's like we're all conscious of what we're leaving to other people now, and what that's going to do. And I always talk about this when I go back to when I was in India. I was like, we're leaving a certain type of earth behind for other people, and it's kind of the decisions we're making and the social interactions that we aren't necessarily directing the planetary, collective towards, can actually have like ramifications for other people's worlds, And like Akira is a really great example of that. It's a manga series I'd recommend to everyone because it's just extraordinary. Gavin lent me Domu, the English version. I already had the Japanese version, but Gavin lent me Domu, which is the kind of before Akira, and it follows. It's, I think, actually the graphic text which influenced me more, because it follows the one specific apartment complex where these telekinetic individuals create, like, basically like communicate and destroying each other's I guess worlds. And it's that sort of thing, is like the after effects of that destruction like have huge ramifications for the people still living there, and they have to sort of like, they have to enact a future. And usually it's like really interesting how you said that, Gavin, because I'm thinking about like, yeah, the rave came out of like difficulty, like that. It's like these things come out of like beautiful things emerge out of some of these things, and I just sort of imagine how we celebrate those things as well. but Sophie's a great example of that. Like that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I really like her, because she's kind of like always, she had to like bear the weight of like horror like and difficult, and then just become this like sort of extraordinary like musician producer. I think that's quite true. Quite a lot of things I'm interested in is like using the materiality of like transgression or difficulty, and then transforming into something quite like wondrous and magical and ethereal. Because maybe it's just, yeah, maybe it's some, I don't want to talk about it in a personal way, but like because there's some things that I don't want to talk about, but like there's just something that is kind of interesting about, you know, the lens coming out of like moving from something to another, like, you know, and then thinking about like the sort of alchemy of that really intrigues me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's there. I mean, it's there in lots of different ways, I suppose, historically, like woven into contemporary art. When you were saying that image of Sophie photographing the moon and falling off the roof, there is, you know, there is something of Bastianeda in there, something of Charlie Chaplin, there's elements of Adrian Piper or Anna Mendieta. There are works which have a tragedy built into them, like an anticipating something that's going to happen in your life that is very beautiful and, you know, lasting, but at the same time as being totally tragic. And
yeah, it was also, I was just gonna say, like it's also tiring that like one of the things I always hold on to is like is that queer people are forgotten really easily in the system, and I don't want to forget people like her or anybody really, like because I think that people are like, in the basic sense of the people are very important, and we should like, this is going to sound so cliche for not this, I don't care, like I really love people and I really want people to like build wonderful worlds together. And I think that's kind of getting harder and harder because the system's kind of preventing that. The systems are raising quite a lot of people. And this, by the system, I mean like, yeah, like what's evident in the world right now. But so I don't want Sophie to kind of be forgotten or like taken, because it's really easy to forget queer people and trans people. And I know that for myself, you know, with people around me. And I think I don't, in terms of the tragedy element, like it's not necessarily like yeah, nor am I romanticizing that. What I'm trying to think about is like how we can, because how we can use some of the things that we're contaminated by as opportunities to imagine worlds which could possibly be for us. And I think that's what Sophie always did. And other, like, there's a plethora of people who I've spoken to Gavin and Ruth about, and the EP team about, who've really made wonderful places to be in, you know, out of like the difficulty. And that's something that, if there's a really great text that me and Sophie Chapman are reading called, and Matt Gale, sorry, we're reading called Atmospheres of Violence, Structuring the Queer Antagonism. It's one of the texts which have just shaped our lives after we read it. And it's by Eric K. Stanley, and they're kind of based as an activist and writer in San Francisco. And they write quite a lot about like the queer archive and what that is, and the destruction of individuals and lives, and the way that the state erases them, but also the beautiful lives that these people live still, because holding them both in account, because there's an ability now in this moment for, and this I think is coming from sort of a weird cishet space of like either like celebrating something queer in such an extreme way, but also forgetting the sort of reality of what people's lives are like, you know. And the same with for like a lot of people of color, like these are sort of systems that we're kind of like finding ourselves in, and now we're being asked to also do the labor of like visual representation of ourselves at the same time.
That's
I feel like
that's what I was going to ask. Like, who is it in that text? Is there a sense of like, is there a role for some people to take in terms of keeping that legacy alive, or?
Well, I mean, I think that,
or is it wrong? Yeah, is it the opposite, that it's like?
I mean, I guess the question that poses, like, who is being forgotten, how are they being forgotten, and also who is being made and who's being unmade in those moments. Because like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera are two like canonical figures in the text, and both to legacy of kind of being like, there's a really great passage in the text where Target have started printing Marsha P. Johnson t-shirts, and then they start with firstly not citing the source, and also on top of it just like for like a month period, and then recently, I don't know if everyone's following the news in the US, but like there's been like Target's withdrawn quite a lot of like queer merchandise because of the like, I guess like, yeah, the rhetoric that's happening in the US towards queer people and queer folks. But like, it's interesting when like a body has to do the labor of representation after it's passing, like it's constantly being asked to like enact further and further, and predominantly it usually is the most like intersectionally marginalized individuals who have to like do the labor. So I was thinking about that. And there's another text I was thinking about, which I'm going to try and figure out how to communicate with this person. Their name is Jasbir Kaur, and they're based in the US as well, but they're from, I think they kind of were in the UK for a while, and they wrote a book called Terraced Assemblages, and it's an extraordinary book. I recommend it. I loved it. I really loved it. It's like a book which kind of looks at like the playfulness of like this post 9/11 assemblage of queerness and terrorism, and it's kind of like, people think that's quite wild, but it's like a really interesting text because it looks at like how queerness was folded back into the state to become visible, so it could bring people into the military and then bring people into legal infrastructures, survival through state mediums. And it looks at it's a short text. I'm not going to go too much into it because I feel like everyone should just check it out if they're going to charge. And in terms of references, I'm happy to give EP text lists, and we can share that post this studio visit, because I think there's some cool stuff. And there's going to be a reading list in the handout.
Okay, yeah, that's good. I think it's that, yeah, finding those ways in when you're here in the space as well, when you're online. I mean, I was trying to think about how that for you, is there a difference between that input and that finding and something like, I just wanted to sort of ask a question about the relationship to Alien, the Alien franchise and the Prometheus film in particular, and do you see them as being, they're just like equal, it's just information that's culturally significant to you, and are they, or are they different types of references for you?
The Alien and Prometheus, and like just science fiction in general, I really like the Alien film. I like Akira a lot. The reason I like them, especially, I guess I'll talk about Alien and Prometheus. Prometheus was like a Ridley Scott's kind of film. I don't know if anybody's watched it. It's like a pop culture thing. Like he made Prometheus as a sort of prequel supposedly to Alien. And if anybody watched Alien, it's basically about this synthetic, well, okay, I mean, I guess when you watch the prequel, you just, I don't want to spoil it now because I feel like some people probably haven't watched it. but like,
I think you have to say a bit.
Yeah, okay, so Prometheus is when human beings make contact or figure out that they have been visited by an alien form, or like some type of entity which has augmented our DNA. And they decide, these humans in the future decide to go and visit the planet, which was there was these archaeological records on Earth, which are all pointing to this is not giving any of the film away, which is great, pointing towards a stellar system in the universe, which is like, I think 8 light years away or something like that. And they go and they investigate, and what they find is like a horror show of like, and I think one of the reasons I really like that film is like, the more we go in search for our origin, the worse we get. Like, you know, like it's like the text that I was actually interested in the show, actually the Book of Genesis, and there's a few other texts about the more we end up going to look for the beginning, the more the origin story, the more we end up like collapsing or forms of reality. Because I think that's the same when I was kind of interested in using that to think about me, because part of this project was me going back to India to visit that village, and I was like, I'm not going back in a sort of romantic, but I was going back as a sort of like, what are the ramifications of like a globalized citizenry now, like going into a certain space, and also the affects of like the invasion of Iraq's destabilization of Afghanistan, leading to like huge heroin production, which is like being moved around the whole of Southern Asia and Southeast Asia. So there were these questions about like this going back into something to find out the truth, you know, like, which I found really quite intriguing. And with the alien thing, it's mostly because, yeah, it's like it's just so weird. Like anybody who watches it is like, I think it's like functionally very strange film to watch, because it's both terrifying, parts of it are very funny, parts of it are just sinister and like eerie. And then you kind of like, because there's a cat involved, and one of my favorite scenes is when the cat's eyes meet the alien's eyes, which meet the human who gets captured by the alien's eyes are looking back at the cat, and there's a circulation of like human, non-human, like interfaces between different biological and synthetic organisms which are collapsing into the same site. And I thought that was, and it was all taking place on this one ship, Nostromo, and it's just like a super fascinating lens to think about like the way that we have to now see each other a bit. And it was, yeah.
It is like an infection process as well, like a parasite, isn't it? And so it's like,
technically, Gavin, it's an endoparasite.
An endoparasite. Yeah, it's like that idea of, I suppose what you want, that makes even more sense thinking about the skeleton and the skin of how you're thinking about actually making the exhibition to put that back to that inside and then outside parasitic infecting process.
Yeah, I really love these things. Like, people think I'm wild and like weird because I'm really interested in like the parasitic and the sort of like, I guess, the more dark, or I hear people use the word negative or negative project conceptual paradigm, but I'm like, I find them quite interesting because in a moment when we're meant to be like excessively like positive about everything in a sort of not only in a material sense but also in a sort of like ontological sense, like you have to kind of like be enacting positivity in the world, because the system is so made it so bleak. It's like also holding the other side as well is really important in your engine, like holding both is really important. I'm conscious because Tala Patel has asked or made a proposition. I think on who and how people are remembered also is not on what digital footprint they leave behind. If people are not written about, recorded in any way, they become urban myths. For the older generation, I feel the younger generations are trying to do this. I mean, it's kind of intriguing to think about like the digital afterlives of individuals, and also that this is not a contemporary thing. This is kind of it's a trans-historical, trans-temporal thing. Like thousands of years ago, people, like, it's just like this idea of a record or trace of something or trace of living or life are constantly being distorted and shaped by the systems of power that govern us at the moment. And I think it's kind of intriguing.
I'm going to take that phrase, the younger generations, meaning people all the way up to the age of 60. Because I just was thinking about someone like Steve McQueen, just, bringing back out the intensity of thinking about the fire and the deaths in New Cross recently. And, someone like that who has, takes a power and a responsibility in a really positive way to re-show and re-educate people about what's been happening in that country. So
I'd also like to put the position out there that I'm not the center of this, so I'm not like somebody who can be the authority or agency of all of voices, but I'm somebody who's quite interested or engaged with the idea that there's a polyphonic ability for us as a culture, as a collaborative being, to actually remind ourselves and remember, and also project outwards into the world the possibility of life and livingness of peoples, so those are kind of the things that I always sit with in the studio. That's why I guess like I never feel alone in the studio, because I've got like these people around me all the time.
So just before we go, get some, if anyone else has got any more questions, I just was thinking about that you exploring that world and the implications of Alien and Prometheus, and then you've gone and sought out Rob Solis, the potter, who made some of the ampules, which were physically, they weren't CGI'd, they were physically made in the film, and so that they had, I don't know, an authenticity, sort of futuristic authenticity. And you've gone to work with them on the show also. Is that what prompted you to do that?
I was interested in those objects because they're in the cinematic history of Alien, they're essentially the first object which contained the contaminant of the alien itself. So they were a bioweapon, both, and they were. What's super interesting about them is the fact they're both weaponry and possibility, because they're both birthers of life, because they're going to make an alien form, but they're also they're transigent, they're difficult because they're about to also take life. So I was kind of interested in that as a sort of way to frame, well, my own thinking was a way to frame what a science fiction process of terraforming looks like, the idea of planetary engineering, and then also traveling that back to what actually happened to India, which was a form of terraforming, because basically the East India Company and the British Raj terraformed India to extract like valuable, and then not only to extract like mineral, earth, food, and all these other things, but then to reverse that and tax the people in the country themselves to get money off them and then bring that back to somewhere else. That's a form of terraforming. And I was just interested in that weapon, the ampule, as being, they're really beautiful objects, firstly, but they're also house a fictive, factual history of a certain state of being in the world. And originally I was speaking to somebody else to make them, and then this timeline-wise, it didn't work. So I moved to talk. I just like out of a whim, just spoke with somebody who knew, who was working with Rob, sorry. And then they just said contact Rob and see if Rob's available. And Rob's based in Newton Abbot, which is in Devon, and they've got a really nice pottery there. And yeah, he's making them for the show, so there's going to be and they're going to have the works themselves actually having digital synthetic screens and forms inside of them, which are all sort of like sensing the environment. So they're going to be a very sensual work, and that's also a component of the work I'm making with my mom, which is actually looking at through the lens, basically the mission to Mars 2030, but looking as though and through the possibility space of what we're taking to Mars, which is going to happen because it's basically billionaire money. So it's kind of one of these worlds we're now living in where we have like an elite class of individuals who get to escape, and we ourselves are finding ourselves are left on the contaminated Earth. So it's kind of interesting that that's kind of the sort of the wide geological layering in my mind is always like this, because I always have these different substrates of thinking, which then start like erupting and impacting each other. I do have images. Is that Amelia? You here? Oh my God! Shout out to Amelia, everyone! Oh my God! So your name? Oh my God, Amelia, I love you. I will show you photos. I'm trying to keep this talk more conversational because I want everyone to come and see this stuff. And that's kind of the revelation. You know, I want this to be like its own revelation.
Yeah, I know. I think like we are talking about quite fantastical and abstract things, and so maybe sometimes it's hard to imagine, but also I think you are good. I like, yeah, the way you describe things to me puts images in my head. It might not be the same image as what you wanted it to be.
I will say, Gavin, there's something interesting about like when I explain this project to people are very nervous about the way I'm approaching it. Like, and I'm really excited about that because I guess people's capacity for, there is something about that when they hear what I'm saying, they're like, that's not doable or feasible within a certain logic of like a visual syntax. But I'm always like, actually, I think it's very feasible. I think it's very doable. I think it's just like, we have to wrap our mind around the idea that we all have different ways of approaching an object or material system. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm always quite conscious of the fact that you can expand worlds outwards, outside of yourself, like tentacles, you know. And I think that type of thinking's kind of gone out of vogue. I don't know why, but like, I really like tentacular thinking, like this idea that
like those loops, because now I'm thinking about, you told me you're going down to the pottery and you're going to carve Punjabi words into the clay on the ampules, and that sort of made me think about then that the fact that you've just been over in India, you've spent time in your village and re-looking at it, and how that feels in relation to what you were saying about that idea of terraforming as that's quite something to step back into.
I kind of thought it was interesting because there's a scene in Prometheus which is about them 3D rendering and actually rendering the whole of the ship so they come across the first engineered ship and they go in and they have these scanners, and that's what basically I was doing in India. And I was like really interested in the fact that like as a migratory as a diaspora migratory body, I was like put in the position of also being an astronaut, you know, going back in, and then slowly that astronaut status was dissolving because I just fell in like my family with them, my friends, and just became so interested in everyone else. But it was interesting that both these parallels of like even physically going in the plane, just all these things were taking place in my head. It was like there's a certain type of subject position that I'm really conscious I'm taking with me and being within and without, and that was what was happening in the film as well. Like it's extraordinary, the film, because some people really hate it, but some people really love it. And I think I fall in the camp who really loves it because there's like 12 different arcs of people, and they're all like have different personality traits, because you have the Dr. Shaw, who's like this most optimistic, she's an anthropologist, archaeologist, like I can't wait to meet them. And then you have like the pessimist, and you have like each of the different roles that human beings take. And I thought it was really interesting, and I was kind of like, I kind of carried all those roles when I was over there. I was like, oh, what am I doing there? I don't want to like, I know, do I want to render people's lives? That's the most important thing, because I didn't want to like go there and have a camera on people. Like that was like the least interesting thing to do. But I was really interested in the reverberations of that space, because that space it's evolving, it's being impacted by geopolitical policy-making realities. It's one of the most water-stressed regions on Earth. It's got all these things which are going on in it. And I'm also like, I found one of the most extraordinary, just potential sites of love. And I really am intrigued by that, you know.
So you found a strong connection there. You felt like you could spend more time there. You would.
I want to go to, I spoke to Gavin and Ruth about this. There's a place in India, it's one of the 4 astrobleams on the Earth. Basically, these are sites where an asteroid has impacted the Earth, and the life inside the asteroid has evolved separately to the surrounding region. So bacteria, viruses, funguses, mycelia structures in the funguses, flora, fauna have evolved with a different sort of, different set of, I guess, genetics because of their sort of availability of iron-rich, I guess, iron ore, which has basically happened because the asteroid impacted the Earth and it's released all this material out, and it also brought something from another space in. So it's Lona Lake, it's in Maharashtra, and India is one of these places which is, again, like politically very volatile, and I'm very conscious of like the sort of like erasure that's taking place in India of populations which aren't part of the master narrative there. But fundamentally, the people who made the countries, it's like this interesting thing that's happening, post 2020, where the farmers in India were resisting quite heavily. I'm very aware of what India is, but I'm also like, it's a site which has the potential to be something. It's like it carries its own geopolitical imaginary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of, there's a lot to take in, and in fact, it seems that it's quite, there's lots of possibilities for the future. So embedded within the show, but also into other projects beyond that. That's what feels exciting at the moment. Did anyone else have any other questions? I didn't see any others come in, but speak up if you want to chip in.
I mean, I'm happy to chat.
Because otherwise, I think we're coming to the end anyway. I mean, there's so many, we could talk about every single one of those bits of tentacular ideas for way more. But I guess that's what happens in a studio visit. You get an impression, you leave with a sensation, a feeling of something, of optimism or wanting to know more. And I feel like we have done that. There's the question. Is this part of an ongoing focus on people, ecosystems infecting?
Yeah, I guess the thing I think a lot about is that there's like thanks, Amelia. There's material ecologies, beings on those materials which sit and live on the material land. And there's like and talking about as though they are the elephant in the room a bit, as opposed to it's kind of like
I've got a little bit of a lag happening on your feed.
Oh, that's quite rare. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, maybe that's fixed it. It's just a glitch.
Okay.
Maybe it's our internet connection that is unstable. Ooh, okay, sorry about that.
No worry. I was going to say, like, there's these things that connect places and people together, and I'm really interested in exploring those things because they're fundamentally ways that people can live futures on these sites, which are like either being eroded or being grown. You know, when I was talking to Elizabeth from our projects and Ruth and Gavin, I was saying that honey's kind of like a good example of that. Like a bit of her dandruff fell on the earth, and then she started growing out of it, you know. And I really like that, like when you see a trace of a person's skin on like the window of the bus, there's like a memory that somebody's left, or an imprint. And there's a really famous image of I'll get to Tara's question next. There's a really great image that has been left on the moon by an astronaut. He left a family photo on the moon, and it's something which has just sat in the back of my head for this. He was given permission to do that, and it's like one of the only things that human beings imagery that people have actually left, other than the Voyager missions, on a different, and I guess the Voyager missions are still floating, but this was left on a physical satellite on the moon. But it just sits in the back of my head that we've kind of left a trace of something of ourselves.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm thinking about a lot. And then it seems intimate and shaped by, so your relationship to India seems intimate and shaped your work. Is this something that has always been there, or as your work has developed? I think it's as it's developed. I think a lot about like how what because I guess I'm inheriting a lot of that stuff. The sort of like the visual codex, like the library of the archive, but also the stories that people have told me about India. I've been to India quite a lot of times in my life. It's not like I don't go back, but it's just I was kind of intrigued by that site because I think that it's a site which is going to be changed quite dramatically. And I've seen the change from when I went when I was younger, when 2002, and when I went back just this year, the amount of like just this physical structural change has taken place, but also the people feel that there is a future, which when you talk to groups there and individuals, whereas the nihilism of the West and the cynicism of the West is really catching up to the like Western liberal subject now. So it's kind of interesting also the anti-nodal structures being kind of interesting because of different locations. I find, because that's kind of something that really interests me. Yeah, but yeah, that's a really great point. I really like, yeah, we carry places with us without even realizing sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, great. We just missed Zach. Zach just said something in there as well. Zach was there and realized.
Oh my God. Yeah, like everyone, I hope, yeah, I hope this helps people. Help people come. Yeah, the show will be interesting. It'll be wild, and it's just the way I am.
Yeah, and there will be some events around when the show is on. There's workshops still happening prior to the exhibition also.
Yeah.
When are the ones in Wolverhampton?
So there's one on next Wednesday, and then one on the following Monday, and there'll be there'll be ongoing conversations about how to shape those as well. But yeah, so, and then there's also like the kids stuff, which is continuing up until July, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, great. All right, well, thank you very much, Sahjan, for letting us into this world and being part of it. Thanks everyone for coming along. We will see you. So the exhibition is in October, if you didn't know. So we've got a few very busy, exciting months ahead now, and then it will travel out to and reiterate itself in ways that are still in progress, also out in Belgium at Kunsthalle Ghent at the start of next year. So yeah, thanks everyone, and we will see you soon. All right, cheers. Thanks, Sahjan.
Thank you so much for coming.